If someone had told me a few years ago that I would eventually find myself living in a quiet Portland suburb while dealing with constant tension between my father's wife and myself, I wouldn't have believed them. But that's where I ended up. My name is Evan, I'm 17, and for most of the time my dad has been married to Megan. Our relationship has stayed stuck somewhere between awkward politeness and quiet resentment. It wasn't something that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It built up slowly over years, starting from the early days when she tried to integrate herself into my life in ways that never felt natural to me. When my dad first introduced Megan, I didn't react with hostility. I wasn't rude or dismissive. I simply kept a respectful distance. I still had memories of my mother, who passed away when I was young, and I wasn't eager to replace those memories with someone new. At first, Megan seemed to understand that. She tried to talk to me, but she didn't push too hard. We kept things civil. But as my dad started getting more serious with her, she began increasing the pressure in small, consistent ways. More direct involvement, more questions, more expectations. The first real issue wasn't an argument or a dramatic moment. It was a school event. My school hosted a yearly Moms and Grandmas concert. I invited my grandmothers, the two women who had stepped up after my mom passed. Megan found out and immediately assumed she would be attending in their place. Not with them, not as an extra seat, she wanted to replace them. I told her the event was meant for mothers and grandmothers. She kept pushing for weeks. I tried being diplomatic, but eventually I had to say bluntly that she wasn't my mom. That was the first time something between us cracked for real. After she married my dad, the pressure increased. She asked if being my dad's wife now earned her the title of mom. When I said it didn't, her tone toward me changed permanently. My dad noticed and tried to get ahead of the issue by suggesting family therapy. For 2 years we sat in a therapist's office talking about feelings, expectations, and boundaries. But therapy didn't bring us closer. It made the differences between us more obvious. Megan couldn't accept that I didn't feel connected to her. She was frustrated that I valued my grandmothers more than her, but I couldn't pretend otherwise. Around this time, Megan suffered several miscarriages. It was a difficult period for my dad and I knew it hurt her deeply. I wasn't happy about the losses, but I wasn't devastated either. She interpreted my neutral reaction as coldness. Her parents agreed with her, and from that point forward they viewed me as part of the problem, not because of anything I did, but because I didn't feel what they expected me to feel. When Megan became pregnant again, this time high risk, the doctor advised strict rest and consistent supervision. My dad works full-time, so he asked if I could stay home during the day. He didn't force me, but I felt the weight of his request. Megan and I never had the relationship she wanted, and the idea of being responsible for her well-being felt unrealistic. I told him I couldn't do it. He accepted it, but I could tell he wasn't happy. He warned me that if I didn't step in, Megan's parents would. And that's exactly what happened. From that moment on, everything in the house shifted in a way I wasn't prepared for. The day after I declined to help, Megan's parents arrived early in the morning. Their silver SUV was already parked in our driveway when I got home from school. It didn't feel like they were visiting. It felt like they had moved in. They walked around the house with a level of familiarity that made it clear they believed they were taking control of the situation. Megan's mother reorganized the kitchen cabinets without asking, and her father inspected appliances as if he intended to give them a performance review. There was no effort to hide their judgment. The way they looked at me made everything worse. It wasn't simple disapproval, it was the look adults give a child they think is failing at a moral responsibility. They spoke to my dad with a tone that made it sound like he had betrayed Megan somehow by not forcing me to step into a caretaker role. Whenever he left the room, they lowered their voices just long enough to make their criticisms sound like confidential truths. If the boy respected her, we wouldn't be here, or, she wouldn't be this stressed if he acted like family. Megan didn't say a word to stop them. She tried to involve me in tasks constantly. She wouldn't ask politely, she'd phrase everything as though I'd already obligated myself to help. If she wanted water, she'd call out from across the room, "You can get this, right?" If she needed medication, she'd announce it as if she were addressing a staff member. Her parents treated every refusal like a personal attack. Then they criticized my dad for never teaching me empathy, and each time he tried to remain calm even though I could see the tension wearing him down. My after-school job at the warehouse became my only escape, but Megan used that against me too. One Friday I walked through the living room after work, covered in dust and too tired to argue. Before I could make it upstairs, Megan said loudly, "So you can work but you can't help us?" Interesting. I kept walking, hoping to avoid a fight. She didn't let me. "You're ungrateful," she continued. "I lost 3 babies and you can't lift a finger." When I didn't respond, she shouted, "You're just like your mother." It was the most direct attack she'd made. I stopped moving, but I didn't turn around. I simply went upstairs. That night, I heard her telling my dad that my neutrality during her previous pregnancies was cruel. He told her gently that I wasn't responsible for her losses. She insisted that if I had made any effort, we wouldn't be in this position. That was when he finally pushed back and said, "Evan doesn't owe you a parental bond." Hearing that mattered. But the situation didn't improve. Megan's parents grew more defensive, and the tension built until everything finally broke. On a Sunday morning, a loud crash came from downstairs. I ran down to find Megan gripping her stomach, pale and visibly uncomfortable. Her parents panicked, shouting instructions at each other while my dad tried to reach the doctor. In the middle of it all, Megan looked at me with a cold expression and said, "This is your fault. You stress me out. You wanted this to happen." It hit harder than I expected. Her parents immediately backed her up. My dad tried to speak calmly, insisting it wasn't my fault, but no one listened. When they left for the clinic, the house went silent. The mess from the panic remained, and I stood there realizing that this wasn't just an issue between Megan and me anymore. It was dragging my dad into a situation he didn't know how to manage. At the clinic, the doctor examined Megan and confirmed she wasn't experiencing a miscarriage. The problem was dehydration and stress, not a serious threat. But that diagnosis only fueled the narrative her parents had already built. They told the doctor that Megan lived under constant emotional strain, and while they didn't say my name, it was clear they wanted the doctor to draw specific conclusions. My dad sat beside them looking tired and embarrassed, aware that the assumptions were unfair but unsure how to contradict them without causing a scene. When we returned home, Megan's parents resumed acting like they had full authority. They spoke to my dad as though he were failing at his duties. He tolerated it for hours, trying to stay level-headed because Megan was pregnant, but it became obvious that he couldn't hold it together forever. I stayed in my room most of the time to avoid escalating anything, but even then I could hear their conversations through the walls. They criticized my dad's parenting, my behavior, the state of the house, anything that fit their narrative. The next afternoon, when my dad arrived home from work, they confronted him again. They said Megan was unsafe in a house where emotional support was inconsistent. They didn't say it outright, but the implication was that I was endangering her pregnancy. They framed it as if I were deliberately adding stress. My dad finally lost patience, not in an explosive way but in a firm, unmistakable tone. He said, "Evan is not responsible for Megan's well-being. He didn't ask for this role and he isn't obligated to fill it." His voice was steady but the message was clear. He wasn't allowing them to blame me anymore. Megan's parents didn't like hearing that. They threatened to take her back to their house, implying that my dad was putting Megan and the baby at risk. Instead of arguing, he simply said that if being at their house was better for her health, then he supported it. His calm acceptance left them stunned. They expected resistance, not agreement. For the next 3 days, the house hovered in an uncomfortable limbo. Megan's parents spent most of their time upstairs with her, barely speaking to us. My dad kept his distance, focusing on work, and I avoided all unnecessary interactions. It was the closest thing to peace we had experienced in weeks, even if it was tense and temporary. Eventually the decision was made. Megan moved into her parents' home for the remainder of her pregnancy. There was no dramatic departure, no final argument, just a quiet shift. They packed her belongings, avoided eye contact with me, and left without any form of acknowledgement. My dad watched them go without speaking. The house felt noticeably different afterward. My dad seemed relieved but also conflicted. He spent evenings sitting in the living room, staring at nothing in particular, trying to process everything that had happened. Sometimes he looked like he wanted to apologize, even though he didn't owe me one. I didn't bring it up. A week later, Megan texted me from my dad's phone. She said she hoped that once the baby was born, I would give it a chance. I read the message but didn't reply. I didn't want to promise something I couldn't guarantee. My relationship with her was damaged beyond repair, and pretending otherwise would help no one. That night, my dad told me, "You're allowed to have boundaries." It was simple, but it meant more to me than anything Megan or her parents had said. With Megan now living at her parents' house, the atmosphere in our home changed significantly. The tension that had been building for weeks sharply decreased, giving both me and my dad space to breathe. But the situation wasn't resolved. It simply shifted from daily conflict to quiet reflection. My dad moved more slowly, talked less, and spent longer stretches sitting alone, not because he blamed me, but because he was finally recognizing the cost of everything he had tried to balance. He and Megan still communicated daily. Their conversations were polite but strained. When he returned from visiting her, he didn't share much about the interactions. He seemed torn between supporting his wife and acknowledging that the situation had crossed a line. I didn't push him to talk about it. I could tell he was processing the reality that his marriage wasn't what he hoped it would be, at least not under the circumstances. Meanwhile, I tried to return to a routine. School, work, chores, it all felt normal again. But occasionally I'd hear my dad sigh or mutter something under his breath that suggested he was replaying the past weeks in his mind. It's difficult to watch your parent navigate something they don't know how to fix. I wanted to help, but I also knew this wasn't something a teenager could solve. One evening he finally opened up. He said he felt guilty for not seeing the situation sooner. He admitted that he wanted Megan and me to have some kind of bond, not because he expected me to replace my mother, but because he wanted a cohesive household. I told him that wanting that wasn't wrong, forcing it would have been. He nodded, saying he realized now that some things can't be repaired by hope alone. Even though Megan wasn't in the house, the effects of her parents' behavior lingered. My dad explained that they blamed him for allowing the tension to escalate. They said he should have disciplined me, which made both of us uncomfortable since I hadn't done anything wrong. But rather than fight with them, he kept his responses short. He said he wanted to avoid unnecessary battles. A few days later, he mentioned that Megan seemed less hostile when he visited, but still emotional. Her parents hovered constantly, making it difficult for him to have a direct conversation with her. He wasn't sure if she believed their narrative or was simply too overwhelmed to challenge it. I told him I didn't expect anything from her, positive or negative. He looked relieved, like he needed permission to stop trying to force a connection between us. About a week after she moved out, I received another message, a longer one. Megan wrote that she hoped I wouldn't hold the pregnancy against the baby. She said she wanted the child to grow up without feeling the divide that existed between us. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't dislike the baby. I didn't blame the baby. But I also didn't want to make commitments based on guilt or obligation. That night, my dad asked if I had seen the message. I told him I had, but I didn't know what to say. He said I didn't have to decide anything now. He reminded me, again, that I had the right to keep reasonable boundaries, especially with situations I didn't initiate or control. It wasn't criticism of Megan, it was acknowledgement of reality. As the days passed, I thought a lot about whether refusing to care for Megan made me a bad person. But the truth is, she wanted a connection I didn't offer, and her parents wanted to blame someone for her stress. I was the easiest target. But that didn't make it accurate. I'm still figuring out what the future looks like. Whether the baby will be part of my life or not. Whether Megan and I will ever manage a civil relationship. But one thing is clear, I can't let other people decide my role for me. I can only move forward based on what feels honest, not what others want me to pretend.